The title of this presentation is Christian Leadership in a Fast-Changing World. And there will be three parts to this presentation. The first part will be the Christians in the world. And then we would look at the world and its current realities. Finally, we would be looking at Christian leadership faced with these realities. What do we do? Let's go quickly to part one. Christians in the world. Let me read to you a passage from the Gospel of John. It says, "If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you." John chapter 15, verse 19. Here Jesus is talking to his disciples and followers and telling them, hey, the world will hate you. Now, we have to analyze this statement because in the same gospel, we are familiar with John chapter 3, verse 16, where it says, "For God so loved the world." And most likely, that word world is referring to the inhabitants, all of us, human beings, and that God loves all human beings enough for them to experience the saving grace of God through His Son. And yet, this same world, its inhabitants, will also hate the disciples, people who made the choice to follow the Lord. So what Jesus is saying, if you begin relating to the people around you, you would then experience this. If you become a disciple, one of the things you would notice is the world, meaning the ideologies, ideas, and the people around you will go against you. Part of a Christian's experience of living in this world is they will not be accepted. Now, that is quite a important warning that Jesus gives His disciples. And I think we Christians today find it sometimes surprising that when our values are different from the people around us, we complain and we say, why are they going against us? And yet Jesus already warned His disciples, you are not of this world. You will find yourself going against the values of the people around you. If you were of the world will love you. But because you are not of the world, and I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. And I think that's a very important Christian truth to hold on to. That as we commit ourselves to the values of the Lord as disciples, we should not be surprised if our values are different from the world around us. Now, I'll pause here and give you some time to think about this. Look at it from your own experience in your workplace and in your encounters with other people. I think you will see this very clearly in your own lives. I'll give you a few minutes. Okay, let's go to part 2. The world and the challenge that we're facing in the world today. One of the clear things that we experience as Christians today is this pandemic. The world has changed. Well, one of the things that you have to also admit, it is the case that the world has always been changing so fast. But this pandemic has opened our experience to the uncertainty of life in the world we live in. One of the things that I'd like to use, which I think some of you in the business, in the corporate world would have heard already, is the idea of the VUCA world. It's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Volatile. Change is happening quickly. You don't know what will happen next day. And this pandemic has made that even clearer. Another one, if it's volatile, things are also uncertain, especially in our workplace, right? I mean, people are asking today, what businesses will remain, which will be more stable, what will I do? Things are uncertain. Before I go to the central word, which is complex, I'd like to at least show you that it is also ambiguous. Why is it ambiguous? Because people are searching for the truth or data that would help us explain things, and people could not find things that are certain. And because things are uncertain in terms of information, things are ambiguous. Now, in this combination of the world being volatile, uncertain, and ambiguous, the third central reality is life has become complex. It's not linear. It's unpredictable. And so to understand what is the right approach and what's the right thing to do is not simple. The world has become complex. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on this. I'm just giving you something that is very clearly what we're experiencing today. And I'm not trying to give you a perspective on how to answer it. I'm just trying to show you, wow, we are living in challenging times. But what makes it even more difficult is the moral unclarity of the world we live in. What's the right thing to do? What's right and what's wrong? That is even more challenging. Moral unclarity has always existed, and we already mentioned it. As Christians, we will face our values are very different from the world around us. But look at the moral unclarity that has come to the attention of people. Look at what happened in Italy. I think you heard of the news that when Italy was swamped, when the hospitals were full to the brim and the maximum capacity was reached, so they were making decisions quickly by the day. And one of the more difficult decisions they had to make was this: who do you save? An older person or a younger person who needs to be in the ICU? What's the right approach to life and death? Who do we care for? Again, I'm not trying to say that this is that this is an easy thing to answer, because it is difficult to answer what's the right thing to do. And if there is no clarity on what's right and wrong, how difficult is it to make a choice? It is very difficult. And you then look at the question of freedom. I think you're hearing news of people complaining that their governments are telling them what to do. But their governments are also telling them, hey, but you need to obey us because it is for the greater good. The question of freedom. What does it mean to be free? All this is happening uh, at the same time, and we find ourselves in the middle of this unclarity. And it could be very challenging for us to figure out what to do. I'd like again to pause here and to give you some time. I gave you some notes there to read it a bit and to reflect on this challenging reality that we are in, and allow us to sort of appreciate the challenge that we're facing together in the world. Let's pause and think about this world that we live in. Okay, welcome again. This is now part 3, the last part of our time together. And I'd like this time for us to then say, okay, as Christian leaders, faced with this reality, what do we do? Now, what I'd like to at least begin with is to tell you that the answers that I would give you are centered on this principle. Yes, there are things that are changing in our world, but the Christian truths that we've committed ourselves to, those things do not change. Those things do not change. So let me give you a few things that we as Christian leaders should take on as a way of looking at what we are faced with, sort of a perspective that might lead you to do certain practical things in your life. So they are more principles and perspectives on how we look at these challenging times that we are facing. First, in principle that I'd like to recommend to everybody, take on this perspective. No one can be an expert about the new normal, which we're hearing as a definition of what the world is, right? We are entering into a new normal. I'd like you to take on this perspective. No one can be an expert about the new normal in the first place. Because as I said, as I described the world and its challenges, people are not even so sure what is new. And if people are not certain what is new, they could not even point to what is normal. So I'd like us to be at peace with this uncertainty, you might say. But within this uncertainty, I'd like to then make us reflect on the truth that you and I have been called by the Lord to be His disciples. So if our first perspective is to admit that none of us are experts in the new normal, what then do we do? Well, my first suggestion as a response to this new normal is that we hold on to the truth that the life of discipleship does not change. In the changing world, there is something that does not change: the life of a disciple. Revelations 21 verse 5, it says this: "And He sat upon the throne and said, Behold, I make all things new." Also he said, write this, for these words are trustworthy and true. This is a prophecy that was given by the writer of the book of Revelation, John the Apostle. And it's Jesus speaking. And he said, behold, I make all things new. Now, what can we learn from this passage? Well, Jesus is assuring the Christian community who was experiencing a lot of challenges. Jesus was speaking to them, and this is John the Apostle encouraging them that Jesus is speaking this word. Hey, I have made all things new. So this means that the most important change has already occurred. And what is that change? The change that Jesus brought into the world. He has already made the world new. And he then tells his followers, even if things are changing around, hold on to this truth, because this truth does not change. Write this, for these words are trustworthy and true. So it means that even if the world around us is changing, and even if there are a lot of challenges, we have to remember that the call to discipleship is still the same. Because we as disciples have experienced the most important change the world needs to experience. And what is that? When Christ said, I have made this new. Bago na to eh. Nabago ko na. And therefore, as disciples, we need to hold on to that truth. Our following of the Lord, it sounds so basic, but it is so true. It is the most important thing we hold on to. As Christian leaders, we need to hold on to the Christian part of leadership, which is, first and foremost, we need to remind people and remind ourselves that discipleship does not change. It's the most important thing. And because it's the most important truth, the world that we live in needs to be reminded by Christians like us who will remain faithful to the Lord and to one another. That's the second thing. We need greater faithfulness as disciples, greater faithfulness to the Lord, and greater faithfulness to our brothers and sisters in the communities that we are a part of. Greater faithfulness to the Lord means looking at the basics of our life of prayer, our life of growing in our understanding of our faith, studying His Word, and learning as Christians, Christian truths. Those are important things even more today. Your commitment to one another as brothers and sisters, those things will become even more a priority to us. As Christian leaders, we should call one another on to greater faithfulness. That's number 2. If we want to focus on the unchanging reality of discipleship, the next thing that we need to do is to be more faithful to the Lord and to one another. Greater faithfulness. I'd like to read to you again the message that Pope Francis said in his Urbi et Urbe message in March 27, during the beginning of the pandemic. And it's a striking thing for me, because he was trying to comment on what happened to the disciples during the storm, and he was commenting on that and giving a reflection on Jesus with his disciples in the middle of a storm. And this is what he said: "Why are you afraid? Have you no faith? Lord, your word this evening strikes us and regards us, all of us in this world, that you love more than we do. We have gone ahead at breakneck speed, feeling powerful and able to do anything, greedy for profit, and we let ourselves get caught up in things and lured away by haste. We did not stop at your reproach to us. We were not shaken awake by wars or injustice across the world, nor did we listen to the cry of the poor of our ailing planet. We carried on regardless, thinking we would stay healthy in a world that was sick. Now that we are in a stormy sea, we implore you, wake up, Lord." What is Pope Francis saying? You know, the world has always been in a challenging time, and people have not noticed the storm. Suddenly the storm, the pandemic comes. And what is Pope Francis encouraging Christians to do? He's telling us, let's wake up the Lord. Meaning, let's remember that we are called to greater faithfulness to the Lord. Amidst the storm, the Lord is calling us to recognize that He is in our boat. So greater faithfulness, brothers and sisters, is the call for all of us amidst the storm. Last but not the least, if the first is to hold on to the life of discipleship as the focus, and second, to have a greater conviction for faithfulness with the Lord and to one another, the third is also very obvious. This is the best time to evangelize. Let's be bold in proclaiming the good news to others. This classic Great Commission becomes even more clear to me. I think, let me read it to you. Matthew 28, which is familiar to all of us. And the story at the very end of the Gospel of Matthew is this. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus directed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And lo, I will be with you always, to the close of this age." What is striking for me is, in this ending time that Jesus had with the disciples, it was described that they worshipped him and some doubted. But amidst the worship and the doubt, Jesus then tells them, this is the time. Go and make disciples of all nations. It is during hard times, it is during times of doubt, that we are called as disciples to go out and to proclaim the good news. And it's both the presence of doubt in us, but also doubt in the people around us. That is the best moment. That striking first few lines of this last verses of the Gospel of Matthew. They worshiped and some doubted. In the middle of the doubt, the Lord is calling us. Go, proclaim the good news, and I will be with you. And I think that is a very important perspective to take as Christian leaders today. That amidst the challenge that we're facing, this is the best time to evangelize. So, I hope that this few insights that I gave you would help you in your reflection to think about what we do as Christian leaders in this fast-changing world. And there's a final reflection that I'd like you to do, and my hope is that this reflection can help you further make concrete our response to the challenges that we're facing today. God bless you, brothers and sisters.